Distinguished Teaching Award 2008 and the Distinguished Scholar Award 2018 from the College of Art Association, which is the professional association of art history. And an honorary degree in arts from Harvard University 2019 and the Distinguished Life Achievement Award for writing on art from the College of Art Association again in 2022. Professor Wu Hong's research interests include both traditional and contemporary Chinese art, and he has published many books and curated many exhibitions on these two fields. His interdisciplinary interest has led him to experiment with different ways to tell stories about Chinese art, as exemplified by his Monumentality in Early Chinese Art and Architecture, published in 1995, the double screen, medium and representation of Chinese pictorial art, 1996, Remaking Beijing, Tiananmen Square, the creation of a political space, 2005, the art of the Yellow Springs, understanding Chinese tombs, 2010, a story of ruins, presence and absence in Chinese art and visual culture, 2012, zooming in, histories of photography in China, 2016, and space in art history, 2018, and his three most recent books from 2022 and 2023 include Chinese and Dynastic Time, Chinese Art and Dynastic Time, published by Princeton University Press, Spatial Dunhuang, Experiencing the Mogao Caves, Washington University Press, and the Full-Length Mirror, A Global Visual History, Reaktion Books. Today, he will be speaking on retelling the story of Dunhuang Buddhist art, a spatial approach. Please join me in welcoming Professor Wu.
Yes, thank Li Hong for this very nice, comprehensive introduction. And I want to thank Center for inviting me here to basically talk about my recent study. Yeah. So basically, today I understand I have about 55 minutes. I want to use maybe around 45, so I will have some time to hear from you. As you can see, this is quite a large project, but certainly it's not the end of this project. Dunhuang is enormous, and what I want to do is really try to introduce a new approach or new methodology. So it's not enclosure at all, but rather try to suggest a particular angle so we can work together to along these and the other directions. So here is one of the books Li Hong just mentioned called the Spatial Dunhuang, Experiencing the Mogao Cave. The spatial definitely is a key term here, and experiencing is another key term. So you will see. So this book basically is not an introduction to Dunhuang Caves. We have quite many of those. It's rather wants to experiment with a new way of thinking about Dunhuang Caves and the Buddhist cave chapels in general, Chinese, Indian, anywhere, these kind of sites. So we have many caves around, you know, they are quite everywhere. The conclusion of this book you can see there is actually titled Toward Our History Methodology. So that's, again, the orientation is not closure, but toward methodology. Today, I hope to explain a central proposal in this methodology and to discuss some representative caves constructed at different times based on this approach as my examples. The center of this proposal, okay, is to re-examine Dunhuang art through the perspective of space. This is necessary because although there are countless overviews of the art of Dunhuang, the framework is generally temporal. If you're familiar with this field, there are many books, but immediately you're given like a chronological, actually dynastic framework. And starting from there, we begin to see or think about Dunhuang. So guided by the dynasties of China's past, these overviews present a linear history of the Mogao Caves. But the real Mogao Cave complex is certainly not arranged in chronological order. When people visit sites, what they see are caves of different sizes laid out unevenly and often overlap, transforming a 1 kilometer long cliff face into a magnificent yet disorienting honeycomb. This sort of thing we may call the undigested spatial experience is what conventional or historical narratives want to overcome. It's too messy, too 乱七八糟. So our historians have to really streamline and put them into an order, right? So by absorbing the chaotic caves into an orderly linear development, the temporal sequence supplants the actual space. So then soon you begin to read those introductions, you forget this picture. You begin to see a chart like this. So all the caves are numbered, arranged in different groups, and each group represents a particular period. So it's a transformation from spatial framework, spatial existence to a kind of chronological dynastic narrative. Yeah. In an essay, I want to cite this because I find it's very useful for me. In an essay on the relationship between time and space, the German-born perceptual psychologist Rudolf Arnheim, he wrote, I quote, "The time dimension possesses no sensory medium of its own, but space is directly embodied in the visual world." And again, he wrote, "What we call space then is a perceptual system that controls the relations between independent object systems." Okay, those are some definitions I offer here. But with regard to the Mogao Cave, just sort of use his idea of this spatial dimension, what is space, apply this concept to Mogao Caves. This perceptual system he's talking about, called space, transform the caves into features, having features such as dimensions, shapes, directions, distances, proportions, areas, borders, and centers. So these are actually the next concepts I use in the book. So space is very big, but it's a system. And what constructs space is really all these aspect, okay? So the concept of space also connects the appearance of the caves seen from different distances into a continuous experience of space, from the mountain range on the horizon to the cliff face covered in caves, and then to the thousand deities emerging from the darkness inside the caves. The instruments used to sense space are first our body and then our eyes. So here entails actual movement. You go to Dunhuang, you have to travel there. You first see it as like a cave in the horizon. Gradually, you get closer, closer. It's everything happened as a kind of spatial experience, right? So let me explain a little bit. Let's imagine a historical visitor's experience when they took a trip to the place. Yeah. So here, we let's follow their steps, basically. Yeah, we follow their steps first to travel from the town of Dunhuang to the cave complex, the Singing Sand Mountains, some 25 kilometers away. So not this one, sorry, it's wrong. Yeah, here is a map, old map, that's town, Dunhuang, and here is the cave. So basically we have to travel there. Ancient time, today, same. We had to make this movement. We will pass along the way. We will pass many temples in ancient time, not today, but in ancient time, based records, we know there were many other temples. We would pass many temples and shrines of different religions along the road. That's important. Now we only see these Buddhist sites, but in medieval times, there were different kinds of religion, Taoism, Confucian, Zoroastrianism, even Christianity. They were there based on texts. So the first chapter of my book really tried to reconstruct this environment based on texts. And then we will see, very important, numerous family tombs, graveyards, scattered across a broad desert between the town and the caves. What were those vanished temples and shrines? That's a question. And what was their relationship with the Mogao Caves we see today? In what ways were the caves and nearby tombs relate to each other in both if both were constructed by the same people? So the people constructed not only the Mogao Caves, but also all these family tombs. So what is the relationship between these two different kinds of structures? How did the Mogao Caves and other religious institutions function in local people's social life? So those are questions understood in this spatial structure. These tombs are very, very important, actually. Maybe Harrie mentioned a little bit more here. With these questions in mind, we will arrive at the Mogao Caves. Actually, I just want to add a little bit. So even today, if you really take a bus from town there, you still see people are burying their deceased family members here. So here you have to think about the people were actually in medieval times to travel from the living quarter, that's the town, to the Buddhist paradise on the mountain, through this realm of death. It's literally, you are actually go to the paradise, let's see amazing pictures, Buddha's Western paradise, and through death. That's what I think a very profound religious experience there. But today we tend to forget it. We just go to the cave and see the beauty there. So the next step, we will arrive at the Mogao Caves, and we begin to see it, which will be behind, hidden by trees. Even like a Tang Dynasty or before, there were trees, so like oasis. To reimagine the experience of a historical visitor, we must deconstruct this total image, like the total image of this cliff. We must deconstruct this total image by asking a series of questions. Was the visitor looking at a few scattered caves or a network of several hundred wood facade covering the cliff? So we have to imagine not a single Mogao cave, but many, many different kinds of Mogao caves in the historical sequence. sometimes at the beginning appear as these, and then like this and like that, like those. So we have to reimagine cave as a kind of like a continuous kind of project, right? For example, what's the Colossal Cave 96? That's the big one. Was this one already stood there or before without that? We have to think about the cave in those terms, okay? So that's the next step. First, we travel from the city, from town to the cave, and then we see the facade, the cliff. Then we think about these questions. Then next, we would enter the caves and experience the synthesis of a sculpture, painting, and architecture from inside. So we situate ourselves in a different enclosed space. The flow of interior space would either lead us to circumambulate the central pillar, to halt in front of the main statue, or to walk along the Buddha's reclining body. So that's the different spaces. So they control the movement. So here you see the structure already tells the visitor to walk around, don't stay. And here you just stay there because the central altar is so powerful, you begin koto and worship. Here, this reclining Buddha is very, very long. You have to walk. The space here is very narrow. So you have to walk horizontally from the feet to the head, like a pilgrimage. And here is another one I will talk about. So inside the cave, there's spatial structure. You see each cave differently. So many questions would emerge. How were the two-dimensional and three-dimensional images are related together? Yeah, so that's the question. For example, here is the same cave here. The front side, we have a frontal Buddha. And then you see behind the Buddha, there is a vertical, like a partition wall, we call the screen. On the back of the screen, there are another Buddha, but it's painted. So we have like two spaces from the back, sculpture and painting. So what is really the relationship between these different icons in different spaces? Then you'll find more questions. And finally, we get very close to the walls, to the paintings, and each painting presents a space. For example, this one is a Lotus Sutra transformation tableau. So if you read the painting closely, actually the chapters, they're circumambulate. So you have to imagine your mind actually follow the stories, go around the central Buddha. So it's not your physical body, but your reading, your mind is conducting this ritual of circumambulation in a pictorial space. So now we have talked about 5 different spaces. It's in a large geographical setting, and in front of the caves, and then inside the cave, and then about sculpture and the painting, this interrelationship, and the pictorial space. There's different steps. So that's basically the whole book, the structure, 5 chapters, and finally conclusion. I want to use some examples to really illustrate this method. The first one is I call the initial group. It's a so-called initial group because it is the earliest existing cluster of caves at Dunhuang. It's commonly known as the 3 northern Liang caves, 北凉三窟. If you read Chinese materials, it's usually called the 3 northern Liang caves. But I don't want to use these dynastic titles because they don't have inscriptions. This northern Liang is the date we give to them. It's not they have this. So actually there's debate about the date. So I call them the initial group. The 3 principal caves in this group numbered caves 268, 272, and 275, differ in size and shape, but share many architecture elements which constitute a series of changing spaces. So all people believe they were constructed together as components of a single group. I agree. The most important feature of these caves is their location. So that's, I think I want to emphasize. These elaborate ritual structures were actually built in the middle of the cliff, 30 meters off the ground, described in historical records as a digging into the cliff in mid-air, 架空凿岩. I put it there. Yeah. It was most likely selected to facilitate a meditation practice. Yeah, because this placement is certainly very inconvenient. To go up and down or to construct, it's pretty hard. So it definitely serves certain purpose, this position. So it's most likely chosen to facilitate meditation practice, or in China called the Chan, 坐禅, meditation, 坐禅, which required a practitioner to clear his mind and turn it wholeheartedly toward the Buddha. The quietness, inward reflection, that's a basic requirement of a Chan. Imagine what a monk sitting in these great caves would have seen and felt away from the mundane realm on the other side of the river called the Daquan River. That's Mogao Caves. So imagine we're sitting here really thinking about the world across the river. Yeah. And a dark chamber high up above the treetops was transformed into the heavenly place of the Buddha. That's also an early picture from the cave. And you see above the trees, the picture was taken in 1940s by Mr. Luo. The archive is now in Princeton and recently published. So we can see this holy mountain called Sanweishan. You have 3 peaks. So landscape, again, is part of this experience. Yeah. So how about the cave? So 3 caves, assuming a visitor started from the smallest cave, cave 268 on the south end, what he or she will see is an elongated chamber carved into the cliff, stretching toward a small Buddha statue in the center of the back wall. Their initial feeling, the visitor's initial feeling, like mine when I entered this cave for the first time, that was 1960s, would be of a cave's narrowness. Actually, unless you really go there, you won't think the cave is very narrow, because all the publications immediately show you like a pretty big space. But those are images I created together with Zhou Zhenru, who's now a postdoc at Tsinghua University. We inserted a figure in it, a monk of average size around 1 meter 65 centimeters. So you immediately can see the relative size of the cave. So in this cave, basically, I am 183, 84, is literally touch the ceiling. So the cave was designed for a single person. And all these Zen cells was designed for a single person. There are no questions. So here I say we have to use our body to measure the cave, to understand the cave. It's even not reading about it. Your body, your relationship with the cave already tells you that is a Zen cave that was designed for a single user. There were no space for other users. There's no communication between people or visitors, right? Yeah. So from a textual and archaeological evidence, we know that meditation was a common religious practice at the time in this area called the Hexi corridor, Hexi 走廊. As stated in a mid-5th century stele inscription from Gaochang, that's towards the Central Asia, but still connected with this area, meditating monks intended to, I quote, end birth and death to leave the world and enter a meditation cave to purify the mind. So it's very clear, right? And they would, quote again, travel freely around the Pure Land and frequently encounter the Buddha. So in their imagination, they will encounter the Buddha and fly to this Pure Land. So the same text also says meditation chambers connect to one another door to door as hidden as the Tushita heaven. They are the spirit residence for the devout and the wondrous place to rest the mind. These ideas explain the design of cave 268 as well as other two caves in this group. So about the next group, the visitor then enters the next one called the Cave 272. This is one of the most beautiful caves in Dunhuang. Well, if you go, try to go there. It's tiny, but it's like a jewel box. It's just gorgeous. So the visitor would have an unexpected feeling of openness, mainly because the nearly square chamber with an elevated ceiling created an airy feeling. The cave is not big because it is square instead of like a long corridor. Like also the ceiling is elevated, so it feels certainly very open. Conventional texts call this kind of cave a Buddha Hall cave or Fodianku. So this structure has led some researchers to suggest that this cave may have been used as a lecture hall. However, considering its limited size, it actually is only 2 meters long and 2.5 meters wide, and the low position of the main Buddha, it was most likely designed still for a single user. So here is again a diagram because the Buddha place very high. The only position to see it is you have to kneel down. You cannot stand there looking down at the Buddha. So it's still for the single person. The intimate interior space would inspire personal interaction with the Buddha and his celestial realm, full of musical resonance and metaphysical significance. This space, the interior space, would have facilitated the practice of meditation, allowing the meditating monk to travel freely around the Pure Land and frequently encounter the Buddha. This is perhaps why the two side walls are covered with images of the 1,000 Buddhas on two side walls, on both side walls. All these images we call the side walls. Every 8 small Buddhas form a horizontal sector in which each image has a different color. These sectors repeat, generating diagonal bands of colors on the wall. So we can see this effect better in a later cave. So really they create like a radiating effect. So because each group have a different color, then they repeat along this pattern. So I think the best description of this visual effect is a sentence from the old Buddhist text. It's called 佛佛相似，光光相接. It's all Buddhas were arrayed in sequence and their radiance joined together. It's about light. And yesterday we talked about the cave. It's dark, but there's a sense of light. And here I feel the light is not external. It's generated by the image itself and also in people's mind. So you do have a light coming out. So that's a very beautiful cave. The yearning to enter the Buddha land found its strongest expression in the third cave, the cave 275. This is the largest of the three caves, and we discovered that from cave 268 to cave 272, and then to this one, cave 275, the spaces increase rapidly in size from 1.5 meter ceiling high to 2.5 meters and then to 3.6 meters. The central Buddha, thinking about the central Buddha statues also change correspondingly in size and placement. The main sculpture in the last cave reaches the ceiling. It's a height of 3.34 meters, triple that of the previous statues in cave 272. So I feel the size is important, also placement very important. There definitely, although there's no literary record, but we don't have we don't have a documentary evidence asserting the sequence of the three caves, but the visual and the spatial features seem to reveal some kind of logic, this kind of development, the increase. And the continuous changes in size of the cave, in the central Buddha, and in the relationship between the Buddha and the worshiper is a constant changing. Another deeper shift is concerned with the spatial relationship between the main Buddha and the viewer, as the distance separating them is gradually reduced and finally eliminated. In the smallest cave, cave 268, the cross-legged Maitreya sits in a tiny niche far off the floor. That's that one. And in the next cave, cave 268, the cross-legged Maitreya sits in a tiny niche, is placed much lower. The second one here, you see the central Buddha is placed much lower, but it's still inside a niche. Yeah, still slightly raised from the floor. And in the last cave, cave 275, a much larger Maitreya sits on a platform with his feet resting on the ground. The niche has disappeared. That's very important. He's not in a niche. Niche disappeared, right? And consequently, the future Buddha Maitreya has moved out from behind the wall and entered the same room as the worshiper. Conversely, worshippers could imagine themselves having finally entered Maitreya's realm. They share the same space, not separated by the wall. This idea is also supported by the design of this whole cave here, whose central theme is actually Maitreya's heavenly palace in Tushita heaven. So we see that on the upper portions of the walls, the designer modeled the several images of the cross-legged future Buddha in this heavenly palace. So theme you see definitely is the Maitreya is always repeated over and over in this cave. Yeah. These images direct worshippers' eyes back to the central icon of Maitreya in the cave's focal point. So you look around all these cross-legged future Buddha, then finally you refocus on the central icon, you see him again. And where this Buddha is making a gesture, this gesture is called the 手印 or bestow mudra, or 语愿印, meaning that the wishes of beings will be granted. So finally, you receive this kind of permission to have our wishes granted. So this is basically the earliest group. I just quickly give you a tour. So, and really show at the very early stage, the Mogao Cave is really perceived, constructed around a set of spatial concept. But this group soon ushered in the construction of other groups on this same cliff. Built side by side in rows, they were extended southward from the initial group. But interestingly, these new caves introduce a radically different spatial structure, implying new kinds of ritual practice and announcing a new tradition in the design of the Mogao Caves. And how long? Still half hour? 20 minutes, okay. I think fine. Okay, then we move to this next stage. Again, guided by this kind of spatial concept, spatial method, we begin to study the next group called the Central Pillar Cave. In cave typology, this new form is called a Central Pagoda Pillar Cave, 中心塔柱窟. But the name Pagoda Temple Cave, 塔庙窟, better reveals the origin of this architecture form, because it imitated not just a pagoda, but a temple with pagoda at its center. Let's say its center. So we see from archaeology some kind of caves or temples built around this time have this design. And in the middle, there is a pagoda. And there is a wide open space, which allows monks to conduct this circumambulation. So this is really from Yongling-Si, and this structure was then adopted by Japanese monks, so we still have some structure there. Here is these kind of caves in Dunhuang. You can see it imitates that entire space with a pagoda in the middle and there's circular space around it. That's pretty clear. The earliest pagoda temple caves in Dunhuang were located to the south of the initial group on the same level. And archaeological excavation have found also some holes indicating that originally there was this stepway just built in the midst of the cliffs, so people could walk really from the early caves to these later caves, just to walk through there. Yeah. So that's the inside of the caves. So if worshippers walked from the initial group to the left, their first impression on entering these new caves would be that a sudden change in the scale of the face. Each of these new caves has a floor area twice as large as that of cave 275, the largest in the initial group. So it's certain increase of the space and the volume, right? Moreover, the front part of cave imitates a wooden structure with a gable roof, which is 5 meters at its highest point, also much higher than cave 275. We see here, that's the gable that's here. Also, often on the upper part, there's a large window. So the inside must have been much brighter for this kind of cave. So much larger, brighter, and allows movement. So the sudden expansion in the cave dimensions implies a new concept of space. These new caves were not designed for sitting in silent meditation, but condensing an entire temple into a cave. They instead provided a space for worshiping the Buddha, and walking around the pagoda. The open space in the front part with its gabled ceiling resembles the main hall in a temple. This space is then transformed into the passageway surrounding the pillar, the central pillar, guiding worshippers to walk around the central pillar. Buddhist texts repeatedly affirm the circumambulating stupa or pagoda would bring believers too close to the Buddha, because the central pillar or pagoda symbolize the Buddha's body. So by walking around with your right shoulder near it, you are very close to the Buddha. So that's very important, this ritual. But important for our historians, I believe, is that once we imagine we are making this kind of movement, then we have a different ways to see the cave, because you're not just looking at individual pictures. You are seeing the sculptures or images in a kind of temporal sequence, ritual sequence. For example, you start from here, worship the Buddha, and start from here, you will find the images on both sides. It's not just one side. And here, interestingly, all sculpture, all three-dimensional. And here to your left is always two-dimensional. So there is maybe some kind of relationship between the images. So this will change our way of thinking about the images and their relationship. So that's a very short introduction to this second type. By the 9th century, by the 7th century is the Tang Dynasty. By the 7th century, by the late 7th century, more than 200 caves have been built into the Mogao Cliffs. So we move very fast. Although the Dunhuang area saw many dynastic changes from the 5th century to the 8th century, the expansion of the Mogao Caves essentially operated according to a set of inherent mechanisms. New caves were continuously constructed through horizontal extension, but were always concentrated on the center of the cliff, never touching the ground nor approaching the top. So it's for 300 years. That was the basic modes of extension, just 200 caves just move. But certainly, actually, there are some exceptions. Like this family, called the Zhai family, certainly decided that this family want to move away from other people, build amazing cave like 100 meters away from anybody else. And there are evidence that they also invited painters from Chang'an to create this new type. So there is a general movement, but there are also individual choices or ambitions. So it's a long story. It's very interesting. If we see these spaces, the Zhai family actually continued to renovate this cave till 10th century, really offer an amazing like a history of our individual family. But anyway, so this up till like late 7th century, that's the general pattern of the development of this cave. And these caves then were originally interconnected by plank paths, horizontal plank paths, and the vertical ladders. The entire Mogao cave complex appeared as a massive interconnected structure suspended on the cliff face. It's not a single building, it's a series of buildings, but it's hanging on the cliff. That's a general visual impact then. So for example, a contemporary writer described this structure in this line. The link paths on the cliff extend into the distance, cloud pavilions circle around. So it's by cloud. Emerald tower stands lofty and steep, above which eagles spread their wings and soar into the sky. Again, emphasize this high and loftiness. The railings and pillars are all beautifully carved, splendidly connect with layered verandas. So layer and soaring, that's the general idea. This layered horizontal structure, however, was broken at the end of the 7th century by the first Great Buddha Caves, 大佛窟, called 大佛, Great Buddha Caves, Mogao. This will be our next and last example. It's called Da Fo, right? The first Great Buddha Caves, Mogao, was cave 96, built at the end of the 7th century during Empress Wu Zetian's reign. The picture was taken in early 20th century, Paleo, yeah. So it was pretty decayed, and today they have been refurbished into actually 5-story building. Now it's a 4-story building. Contemporary people at Dunhuang called it 北大象, or northern great image, because then later there appeared a similar one to the south. So that one is called the southern one here. That's called 北大象. Inside the cave was a seated Buddha statue measuring 35.5 meters tall. So it's an enormous, giant statue. That is a floor plan. You see that one is the feet of the Buddha. That's from above. That is a cross section. That is the size of the figure. Okay, just to give you a sense. So this cave just suddenly emerged. So it was a 4-story wooden structure, more than 40 meters high. Yeah. But the sculpture was hidden from outside. So you couldn't see the statue from outside. It's covered. That's very interesting. This kind of big Buddha statue, actually, you do see outside almost like pagoda. But once you're inside, you discover this, this image. I'll talk about that. So inside the cave, the lower level started from a spacious hall. Here is a spacious hall. Through this passage, then there's a passage. Through the passage, the visitor could have a glimpse of the Buddha's feet. You couldn't see the Buddha at this point. What you see is the lower portion below the knees, On entering the chamber, they would discover that they were standing at the feet of a massive Buddha, and their eyes would be drawing up the Buddha's body almost endlessly. They would sense the infinite power of the Buddha and just how small they were themselves in comparison. As described in a sutra called the Zheng Yi Ahan Jing, I find very interesting this description. Just what is the idea behind this enormous statue? So but here we have this paragraph, say the body of Tathagata is the Buddha. It's a great body, and it is indescribable. Therefore, the body of Tathagata cannot be made artificially and cannot even be attained by all devas. The body of Tathagata cannot be touched, his length cannot be talked about, and his voice doesn't conform to a rule. Thus, the Buddha realm is indescribable. So from this perspective, the goal of this cave was to lead worshippers to approach this indescribable body of the Buddha. It's not really totally conceive its entirety, but rather you're incapable to see the Buddha in its entirety, right? So letters between the stories on the wooden structure in front of the cave led the worshippers gradually upward. As they climbed, they would ascend from the Buddha's feet to his knees, chest, and head, looking at the body of the Buddha from a series of vantage points. When they finally reached the highest level and they looked directly upon the Buddha's face, they would reach the pinnacle of a religious experience by completing this visual journey. So through this unique pilgrimage, we may say, the visitors were able to behold the Buddha's indescribable body through kind of mental reconstruction. Only in their own mind, they can assemble this fragmentary visual experience into an image. So here is really the Buddha faces pictures taken on different levels. At the beginning, you see that way. Then you climb onto the second level, you begin to see the different ways. So the Buddha is changing, but the visitor could never really just comprehend the whole image. So there is an interesting power dynamic between religious icon and the worshiper, but the icon or the Buddha is always as an ultimate, like that's a source of power. So I feel this structure is really, really very important. It appeared at the pinnacle of Tang power, especially under Empress Wu Zetian during that reign. There are a lot of interesting things we can explore aspects. There are actually one common knowledge is about the facial features of this Buddha. Many people feel it looks very feminine. And also the body and the drapery. Yeah, it's hard to see the drapery. Actually, the upper part, just from here to shoulder, is exposed. It's very different from the normal kinds of Buddhist, like a jiasha robe. So very interesting, this the appearance of this enormous Buddha and the gender issue, the political power, and everything. One important feature of this new cave, this big cave, is that it altered the entire cave. It's not just a single cave. Once this giant cave appeared, it changed the entire concept of the Mogao Cave. So the construction of this cave had a crucial consequence to the following construction of the Mogao Caves. This monumental structure introduced the concept of center and hierarchy into the cave complex. So before this moment, you remember that slides, you have a row of caves. There wasn't this sense of center. Although some big caves were bigger, some smaller, but they were built like equal partners of the whole community. But certainly you have something like that. So you bring in this concept of center and consequently hierarchy. And the whole area also changed its meaning. The closer that a new cave was to this giant structure, the closer it was to the center of the entire cave complex. Consequently, places near this great cave and became the most sought after by political leaders during the 9th and especially 10th century. So these new caves were built by local rulers, their family members, religious leaders, and other peoples. So the tendency became most obvious after the mid-9th century, when Dunhuang was ruled by this local government called the Guiyijun, or the return to the righteousness army. Yeah. Let me see what time's now. It's about. Oh, okay, good. Let's see if I have a few words to wrap it up. Let's see if. I actually think I want to stop here because there's quite a lot to say, and that book is available. I just gave you some glimpse and talk about the central idea. I think the idea is quite clear. We can just move on. My last image, actually, I want to repeat, just repeat this really about this the last stage called the pictorial space. In Chinese, there is a I feel, very important concept that so far overlooked. This concept was given very early in 5th century as one of the so-called 6 principles, 6法, by the Xie He, very important art historian, theoretician at the time. The 6法 or 6 principles refer to the 6 major aspects of painting. So one of them is called the 经营位置, or is called the managing positions. Just an artist, when you compose a painting, you have to 经营位置. 位置 is positions, placement. 经营, managing, place. You have to put the images in a right place, right order. But when you think about it, it's a principle for any painting, right? Even Western painting, I would say the entire so-called the perspective system is a kind of 经营位置. So in Western painting, you group images according to the scientific linear perspective. So it's a 经营位置. But Chinese also have this idea, but their way of managing the space is different. Basically on a 2-dimensional layout, and find the center, find the logic, find the movement, rather than guided by this scientific model of a linear perspective. So that's the last chapter of this book on this pictorial space. Okay, I end here. Thank you very much. Yeah. So any question or comments, whatever.
We'll take questions. We have precious opportunity for one question. Yeah, please.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Wu, for the wonderful presentation, as always. I have read all the book in Chinese version.
Oh, you did.
And he has used a different English title for it. Actually, it's Approaching, and now it's Experiencing. And approach, I find in your book, Monumentality, you have used in this extrinsic and intrinsic approach. So it's kind of synonym to perspective.
Right.
And I feel since your Mellon lecture, you are trying to replace this dynastic time with this intrinsic time. And in this book, perhaps you are trying to replace from a spatial perspective.
Very good question. Yes,
go ahead. So I want to put a question on the subject matter, the choice of subject matter. So in the Hui Yijun period, you have shown there is the back screen cave has appeared, so it allows a huge space for mural paintings, and the lower part is for these so-called 供养人.
The donors.
The donors.
The lowers, donors,
so,
the uppers.
And the donors, in the cave 61, I think the donors have different categories. They are donated not only to his own Chao family, but also to Zhang Yichao and Suo Xun. So his former Jiedushi. And also to these lower officials, and also to other Ganzhou Uyghur, and to the kingdom of Khotan to the west. It seems he is trying to seeking for to embracing all the people he can unite through this donor thinking. That's accompanied with that. In the same cave, you see this huge mural of the Wu Taishan.
Yes.
So which you have divided it in your book, Chinese History of Painting, into 3 panels. The lowest one is a pilgrimage route. The pilgrimage route seems to be also the commercial route. And the Chao family is of this Sogdian origin, so they are very good at commercial. Does this has a link with that? And perhaps a small one, because this accompanied with this Reaktion painting, in the story painting reappears sometimes in 33 panels, screens, more than 100 stories. Why did it appear in this period? Can you explain that internal approach? Internal time?
Thank you. Well, anyway, that is a very specific issue. Maybe we can talk about this last question later. But the first two you mentioned, I want to explain a little bit. One is that the title of the English version differs from that of Chinese version, you notice. And the main title is the same. Subtitle in English is Experiencing the Dunhuang Cave. And the Chinese title is Approaching. 走近 is not, you get closer, 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 implies a movement. So actually the English title was suggested by my publisher, University of Washington Press. They feel this, this 走近, or how do you translate it, is moving towards Mogao Cave is too subtle for most readers, because I imply this approaching or getting closer is both physically and intellectually. So you really get closer, you from outside, inside, from distance to, and also mentally you understand better. They feel it's too, I won't say sophisticated, but just too subtle, people won't get it. So experiencing is more direct. Yeah, I agree. I think there's a reason. We have to think about the readership, whatever. So that's a simple explanation of it. Another one, I think you mentioned a very important one. Only I cannot remember. But anyway, so yes, about temporality, about the relationship between this book and another project, another book I wrote for these Mellon lectures called Chinese Art and Dynastic Time. Basically, re-examine this framework we call the dynasties, because all Chinese art history is narrated according to dynastic time. It's so essential, so people forget it. So we forget actually we're using this thing. So, but here you can see, try to get away from it. But it's not entirely, but rather I feel the strategy, here is my answer to your question, also is a project that I'm still thinking, is not really realized in this current book. It's really how start from here, this spatial examination, we can return to the notion of a temporality and rethink the temporality of the Mogao Caves, not immediately or naively following dynastic time, but going back. So from this study, I begin to discover different times there. One is the family time. Like all these caves were family caves. Many inscriptions really appear as a family history and tracing your ancestry, your different like forebears. So family time. Another kind is a monastic order. They have their own history. And there is yet other kinds, and dynastic time actually is one of them. Like the big Buddha, that is based on dynastic time. It's the Empress Wu Zetian and his order. It's had direct connection with the dynastic power. So that just my current thinking is really, if I do the next study about temporality, would be investigating these different kind of times and their interactions in the history. That's basically.
Yeah, David.
I'm curious about illumination within the caves and practices. And so some of them have natural lighting, like the big Buddha. And so some of them had natural lighting that went away too, but they seem to go further and further into the cliff.
Right, right.
And do you see any architectural features within the caves? For instance, to put a lamp, an oil lamp, for instance. We do have records on the ceiling of the burning of torches, which sounds like a very bad idea in a cave for ventilation purposes. But anyway, and we also have the lamp lighting festival, but that seems to be oriented more for outside than in the cave. But anyway, this general question, we see all these images, it's all artificial lighting, right?
Right.
For the photography, so we don't know how it was experienced.
Yes. Wonderful question. Again, a question actually yesterday, several people are having dinner and we talk about this, not just in Chinese caves, in any kind of religious temple or cathedral, the medieval church, whatever, the illumination, the lighting, the complex murals and the carvings. How did people see them? How could they see them? You know, sometimes so high up, sometimes behind something so dark, like a Dunhuang Caves. The smaller one, even middle-sized one, really quite dark because they have a front chamber, they have a corridor, then you have the rear chamber. Inside the rear chamber, that's the location of the most images. It's quite dark. So far, I haven't seen any serious studies of this issue, although many people recognize it. And different explanations, some people suggesting, including myself, said the meaning of the images is located in creating them, like a devotional acts. So I checked through all the inscriptions related from medieval or up to the 12th century. I haven't found a single word pertaining to viewing. Everything is about donating or this dedication. So that says something. But still, this doesn't really answer the question. Still, there are images. They are still created for eyes, right? Still being viewed. So their viewing is the issue still there. And then some people say maybe it's the artisans, the artists, when they painted that is really more important. The visitors, they didn't really look at them very carefully. They just know they're there. Those are Buddha, their story, cover every inch is their merit, proof their merit. But anyway, this question is very essential, and I don't have an answer, but I feel definitely we should do something. Definitely there are possible sources. One is natural light, still maybe at a certain time of the day, because Dunhuang Caves face east. So maybe in the morning, the lights could really just brighten the inside more. Another is artificial light, like candles, lanterns, something. We do have an illustration of these lantern trees in the cave 220. There are hundreds of candles put on a tree, like a Christmas tree. Those, I believe, could generate lights. But again, we don't have a scientific or a very detailed study of this issue. I feel maybe just to go one step further, just about not just lighting, it's about a kind of senses in the cave. It's a religious place. Now we treat it as a kind of purely visual kind of experience. But in actuality, at the time, there's lighting, there's incense, there's smokes, there is movement, even the changing lights. If you hold some lights, maybe the light was not stable. The images may be emerging, disappearing in this kind of space. So I feel those, a little bit like your study, more theatrical. So could be very interesting. So I feel anthropology or performance art or like a oral recitation and the front space, back space probably have a different uses, right? And the later caves you mentioned, very big. Actually, you could have a larger kinds of activities staged in those caves. Thank you.
I have a question from the virtual audience. Hi, Professor Wu. Thanks for your talk. Your mentioning of the spatial structure of the Mogao Cave reminds me of the Islamic arts,
Yes.
most of which are arranged in a spatial way. Considering Mogao Cave's location and its time, I'm wondering if there's any potential relationship between these two types of art.
Thank you for these questions. So actually, I just 2 weeks ago, I was in Istanbul visiting all these great mosques. Based on my study, I don't think there is a direct relationship between Mogao Caves and the Islamic religious structure in terms of historical time, the actual context, but in principle, like how to construct a kind of religious structure to facilitate like different kinds of rituals and other kinds of worships. I feel there are a lot of things in common and with other religions. So I feel a certain kind of comparative study definitely is not only doable, it should be done and by scholars from different fields. Yeah, there.
Thank you for this rich talk and privileging space and experience of space in our understanding of the caves. I'm wondering if one can return to the question of time in the light of this kind of rich privileging of spatial understanding. And in particular, I'm wondering whether one can think relationally about the emergence of particular sites within the caves. Say, for instance, the Great Buddha, in relation to, say, the Bamiyan Buddhas, and what that relational understanding can do for our privileging of space and experience, and returning to the question of, say, dynastic time, family time, the time of pilgrimage, devotional time, etc.
Sure. I feel there's implications in both study and education, because in education, I prefer more and more using spatial models. Here it's still very crude like those. Yesterday, in our conversation, we said the new VR, like a new AI, if we can really instantly, it's not just PD, there is some way to provide the 3D models incorporating these temporal process. Like I say, move toward the town to the cave. Actually, you can see that you can even, students can participate. You can be part of one of the travelers. I feel that is in the near future. And based on this kind of study approach, certainly we can review these historical connections between different sites, between China and Pakistan, Afghanistan, or India, or even other places. Like if we just use caves as a kind of type or site, and the structure and the ritual and the movement, definitely we can study them together. We have studied them, but more from like a more static kind of points, either iconography of the Buddha or the deities, or the architecture structure is empty structures. So we can now really put them together and still compare that. And also, I would say, not just a historical with our contemporary sense of space, the architecture and social life. That's also, we can force this chronological gap to think about this. Technology, I do hope someone, I'm incapable, but some younger people can begin to design certain things for classroom, for the general public. It would be really fascinating. Thank you.
That's a simple question. I noticed that most of these, in fact, all of them have a general eastward orientation. Is that related somehow to the fact that the capital is toward the east, or is it related to the traditional Chinese understanding of the time of the vital qi. the
Yeah,
Shang
yeah.
qi of the rising sun,
Mhm.
at the time of the rising sun.
Yeah, that could be, yeah, that's, yeah, the good observation. But yeah, people don't really know if these Mogao Caves, which face the east. So the main Buddhas are located against the west wall, facing east. Really, from the Buddha's point of view, it's really look at the east, the rising sun. Was this conscious decision based on the orientations, or was it decided by the just a natural the natural location of the mountain cliff? Because the myth is that a monk, when they are in the early 4th century or something, he traveled around there, and certainly he saw the 1,000 Buddhas bashed in golden lights on this cliff, just certainly emerged on this cliff. So he decided to build the first meditation cave or the hut there. So that is just that cliff was so miraculous. So anyway, I feel it's a good suggestion. And by implication, it's very interesting because the inside the cave, they still have to reorient the directions. So although the cave in general faces the east, but once you're inside the cave, you have to mentally conceive the back wall, that is the western wall, as the north. Then design the other 3 walls accordingly. So outside this cave complex belong to a larger, some kind of cardinal or geographical sphere. So it's facing east. Inside cave become independent space. Still is facing south. We have many, like all these 5 elements, all the deities, east, west, or something, are designed according to this inside the interior independent spatial system. So Eastern Buddha is actually painted on the north wall or something like that. Yeah. Direction is very interesting. Yeah. One more question. Hey, yes, please.
So I just wanted to ask, I thought it's really interesting that you invoked Arnheim at the beginning, and then the conclusions about towards an art historical. I forget exactly how you said it, but I'm wondering if you could just expand a bit on what you think art history is, both in its past and where it's going.
For me, to be grilled.
Well, I ask, I maybe to give it more context, I ask. I mean, you've been in this biz for quite a long time, and a lot of your you've brought Chinese art into a lot more dialogue with the rest of art history, and it seems to me that some people are in a mode now where they might be discarding art history or sort of thinking about other terms and frames for thinking of that. And I think it's just really interesting to see using those words again and where you see the value in that.
Yeah. Art history, is just the word we choose. And some people may prefer like newer words like visual culture. They say, oh, those things, they were not created as a great art. Yeah, in medieval times, they were religious paintings, have functions, but we take them as a high art or whatever. So I feel they're good reason. So art history, I see, is not what they are, but it's really about a discipline in our academic or studies. It's really just a field. And this field, from its creation, has developed a certain methodology, different approaches. So there's a layered development. I feel it's very much like a modern intellectual enterprise. Yeah, art history. We call it art history. You can call it other things. I feel it doesn't matter. It's more about this, how a field, a discipline is constructed, developed. And, but now we reach a point, I think that's your suggestion. Just traditionally, we feel our history is just one field, or basically started from German scholarship. Then a lot of terminology, a lot of early methods developed in that field. Even American history really is based in German. When I studied at Harvard, then everybody, whatever you study, Byzantine art, Chinese art, or any art, American art, you had to study German. That's so, but today is certainly very different. We realize that probably on the methodological level, we can talk to each other. But the actual development of visual traditions, there are many different locations around the world at a different time. And sometimes they contacted each other in the course of history, and sometimes they didn't. We kind of just assume that all the visual forms developed according to one logic, the one pattern. So I feel now we have to doing some kind of delicate kind of movement. One is that we recognize independent visual tradition and discover them and study them in the context, whatever context. At the same time, we also keep a dialogue with our colleagues in other fields, other branches within our history. It's not just I'm a Chinese art historian, I just do Chinese art, you are doing other. We still belong to our history, right? So we can still think together. I feel that maybe contribute to a larger narrative we call global art, or kind of a way to talk about the global art. Like these kind of big museums, like which incorporate different art traditions. How do you tell the story? You just put different arts in different rooms, no connections, or you do want to come up with some kinds of narrative connecting those. I feel those are our historians today have to deal with. Yeah.
From the past to the future, let's thank Professor Wu again.
Thank you.